Hello friends, Jennifer Pearson here, Thistle Gypsy. Continuing my exploration of the Sacred Sites Tarot. So this deck is currently out of print, which I just have to wonder why. Was it really that unpopular? Well, maybe so, because it really deserves more than this little white book. You might say it requires more than the little white book, which is why I'm doing all of these videos. Excuse me. If you don't know all of these sites already, then it requires some research, I think, more than what they have in the little white book. But you know, it's a cool deck. I wish they would do it more justice, you know, provide a better guidebook and reissue it. So today, I've already gone through all of the majors, all of the suit of cups, and now I'm going to go through the suit of pentacles. And sometimes, you know, the significance to the Tarot Association isn't perfectly clear, but I've come to think that probably if it's not perfectly clear, I probably just haven't hit the exact bit of information that resulted in this place being assigned this tarot position. Because sometimes I've found where I thought, well, you know, it sort of fits, you know, it was probably just a little more forced than the others, but then I'll be still poking around among documentaries. I'm usually using documentaries on YouTube to glean information about these sites, because I can kind of listen to them in the background while I'm doing other things. And every now and then, you know, if I continue and, you know, keep looking, I will hit on something that's like, oh, that's the fact. That's the one bit of fact that they're using to place this location with this particular tarot card. And there's quite a bit that makes sense within this suit of pentacles in terms of their choices. So the earth, they're taking a lot in terms of mountains. So this is Machu Picchu for the first card, the ace. And they worshipped mountains. The oh no, what is it, the Incas? I think it's the Incas in Peru. They worshipped, it's driving me crazy. Let me see if it says. Yes, the Incans. Okay, Peru. Once the summer residence of the Incan emperor and nobles, and later abandoned, its location remained a mystery for a long time. That's all it has to say. In any case, they worshipped mountains. In fact, there is a stone, or more than one stone, within Machu Picchu that they believe is an orientation, a place that marks a place where you can see 4 important peaks that are in the 4 directions. So there's that aspect, and it's also the foundation of the city was critical to its preservation, that they create ways for heavy rainfall to drain and not, you know, drag the entire city kind of off the cliff. So the foundation, Ace of Pentacles being a foundation, was their engineering of their foundation was critical. So I found those things very interesting. And then I don't know why this is shown with these two crystal balls, but this is the Hagia Sophia. I suppose the juggling. They're trying to put the juggling aspect of this card, Two of Pentacles, in there. But really there isn't that much juggling. It's a beautiful integration. You know, this might have been a better temperance card. But Christianity and Islam, both in Hagia Sophia. The other thing that they might be bringing up is that one of the fascinating aspects of this building is that it sits on, is it more than one fault line? But at least one major fault line. And so it's considered a wonder of engineering in that it has not collapsed due to shaking. So it does get shaken by the earth, juggled, attempt to juggle it by the earth, and it refuses to fall. But I see this as more juggling the two belief systems, or worshippers having the influence of both, and it being treasured by both, which can be in an uneasy situation. And the next is, and this one I don't get in this position. So this would be the Three of Pentacles, and it's the Wind Palace in Jaipur, India, also known as the Hawa Mahal. And this made much more sense for the Three of Cups. And the Three of Cups was the Garden of the Hesperides with the golden apples. And so that would have made a lot more sense to me for the Three of Pentacles. Well, what we have here for the Three of Pentacles is the Wind Palace, Palace of the Wind. And it's a facade that is like a bunch of galleries. It's like stacked galleries where with little windows where the women of the palace, they didn't call them a harem, but the women of the palace could look out onto the city life, markets, and what was going on, because they were not allowed to go out and mingle. So they could hang out up there and stay cool, and also see what was going on. None of the things that I watched, which couldn't really be called documentaries, a lot of them were quite casual, indicated that when the women sat in these little alcoves along these galleries, that they were engaged in any form of work or cooperation. And there's nothing that I found that was about the construction of this that indicated the level of cooperation that is normally signified by the Three of Pentacles. And just the name of it, the Wind Palace, makes it a little bit difficult as a Three of Pentacles card. You know, there was nothing talking about, you know, who was consulted in the building of it. In the traditional Three of Pentacles in the Rider-Waite-Smith is the building of a religious, you know, it looks like they're finishing touches on a cathedral, and this is not that. This is simply an area in a palace, probably more intended for social gatherings than anything sacred. So this one This one was a little hard to grasp, and this is the one where that little piece of information never quite arrived. that was going to tell me why this was chosen for this particular assignment, and not some other location entirely. Anyway, on to the next one. So this is the Pantheon, I believe. Yep, the Pantheon in Rome. So this is the Four of Pentacles with its oculus there. So it's got, you know, in the Four of Pentacles, we have the pentacle on the person's head. Well, here we have that, what they called an oculus there. So there's that. But the other thing about this is that it holds the Pantheon. You know, so it holds all of the various gods. So the idea was to bring all of the gods, as well as some emperors and things, all together in one place. So to hold it all together. One building to hold them all. Not one ring, but one building to hold them all. So that made a lot of sense. And also just the solidness of it speaks to being a four. The solidness of the building and the harmonious construction of the building was interesting to listen to. Its geometry. It's very stable geometry. So that makes sense with the fours, or an 8, but it works for the 4 in terms of the gathering together of all of those gods into one place. All right, so next we have 2 or 3 fantasy, which is interesting in a suit of Pentacles. Things that are essentially fantasy, and this is one of them with the 5 of Pentacles. It's the Labyrinth at Knossos. And so my understanding is that, and which makes sense for the 5 of Pentacles, is that this fantasy of the Minotaur grew out of the ruins of Knossos. In other words, Minoans, I believe, the Minoans had already been long gone, and so the Greeks imposed their imagination upon the ruins of the city, and the ruins had a maze-like aspect to them. I don't even know if it was a city or if it was just a palace. You know, and it didn't have this kind of a labyrinth, but it had a labyrinthine kind of structure, and you could even say it had a bit of a double axe. The labrys, Labrys, is an axe that has a blade on both sides, opposite each other, and so it was talking about the labyrinth as essentially having a shape like a labrys, and there are labryses carved at places within the walls here, as well as images of bulls. There's lots of images of bulls. So essentially, the Greeks took that, the ruin, the bulls, and they created this mythology there. So an interesting way that lends to this card, if we think of a traditional card, as people who are wounded or unfortunate, you know, struggling in life, walking past the cathedral where they could stop and perhaps get help, is to ask yourself, what myth of misfortune have you created for yourself? What stories are you telling yourself about your separation from others or your inability to get help, etc., etc.? So I think that really adds another layer to the card to think of it in that way, as how is your circumstance a product of stories that you're telling yourself without a lot of evidence in fact, in actual circumstances. So I think that adds an interesting aspect to this card. So a lot of times I read from the guidebook, but I think that last time where it was so useless, I'm just not even going to consult the guidebook unless I feel a need to. So the Six of Pentacles is the Bodhi Tree, where the Buddha experienced enlightenment, and it's a peepul tree, P-E-E-P-U-L, is it? I'm not sure exactly how to spell that. It's a type of fig tree. And of course, you can look at this many different ways. You can see the fig tree, if it had fruit, giving. If you can certainly look at the tree as perhaps having given, or well, I'll just say this and then I'll give some other background. The tree is having given him enlightenment, Siddhartha enlightenment. So what I learned is that there are others who had found enlightenment under trees. I don't know if they called them Buddhas, but whatever they would call them, that they would also find enlightenment under a tree, and then that tree would also be, I don't know, not venerated by others, but associated with that specific person's enlightenment. So that was like a side note. I found that very interesting. So I don't know how they assign the relationship between the tree and the enlightenment. I have no idea if the tree supposedly played a part, or if it's just considered special because of the persons associated with it. So it is now a place where people gather. My understanding is it's not the original tree, but it might be cuttings from the original tree. Like there was a story that, and this is another giving aspect, where cuttings were taken from this tree, and a new tree was grown from them in, was it Sri Lanka? I'm not sure that I have that correct. And then when this tree was cut down or died, the original tree, then cuttings from that tree in Sri Lanka was taken and restarted the tree that is presently there. There were stories of that, the initial tree being repeatedly dying or destroyed, and trying to find cuttings from the original tree to restart the one in the religious location. So there's that aspect of giving. It's a place where people continue to go to receive, I don't know if they're looking for enlightenment, but spiritual energy, certainly. And I think this also speaks to the Buddhist monk, the tradition of Buddhist monks of well, what we would call begging, or of only getting sustenance according to what is given to them, that they can't take it, they can't produce it, they can't go into a store and buy it, that it needs to be offered to them. So there is within the Buddhist tradition the whole aspect of making offerings. So to people who do not have, cannot have sustenance otherwise. So a great choice for that particular card. And I can't remember how to pronounce this, if it's Lasko or Lasko Caves. It's kind of an amusing image because he looks like he's been caught off guard. What are you doing in here with a camera? You traveled through time and you've caught me painting. So yes, the cave that has all of the ancient animal art in it. And that was interesting to learn about, how there's a gallery of the bulls and a gallery of the predators or the lions, and the various divisions within the cave and all of that. So this is the Seven of Pentacles. So I didn't really find out that much that struck me as Seven of Pentacles from the things that I was watching, but I know that I have heard in the past that one of the assumptions about the pictures and the markings in, perhaps not in this cave specifically, but in other caves, was the marking of herd sizes. Like, how many have we got? How many have we got this year? How many are in this area? How many are in that area? And so there's that notion of reviewing what you have that comes along with the Seven of Pentacles. Where are we at? What kind of yield are we getting from the efforts that we put into things? So that's what I'm going to associate with this, is just taking an inventory of what's around you. All of the bulls, the horses, the lions, the occasional rhinoceros. In this case, archaeologically speaking, not religious site speaking, but archaeologically speaking, when we, in our time, go into this cave, that's what we're looking at. Well, look at this. They had these, and they had some of those, and these were obviously important to them. So, you know, we're taking that kind of inventory of the cave, or have had people taking inventory of the cave. So that aspect, it makes some sense with this cave. All right, so we're on to the 8. We have the Olmecs. Now, I had done the Olmecs previously, but this is specifically, at least I associate that with the Olmecs. Let me see what they say in here. Maybe I'm thinking of a different card. They might have another one that has it. No, they just say it's the Mayans. Okay, so I think it's pronounced Washaktun, which means 8. 8 stones in the language, which is what it has here. It says its name means 8 stones, in reference to the 8 Baktun of the Mayan calendar, the oldest Mayan date known. So it was really interesting to read about this. But essentially, the 8 stones are 8 platforms, I guess you would say, built on top of each other. So there's the first one, and then 52 years later, 52 was a significant calendar date where 2 calendars conjoined, you know, in their record keeping. And so every 52 years, they would build another platform that completely encased the previous platform. And up it went, up to 8. The 8th one is no longer in evidence because it was crumbling when it was initially found. But it's that crumbling, they say, that showed them that there was a previous one encased within the one that was crumbling. So that's how they came to understand the construction there. So it is a labor 8 times, and essentially building the same thing 8 times over on the same spot. So that makes a lot of sense for the 8 of Pentacles. And this was a location that was, aligning the solstices and the equinoxes. I think the primary thing was actually the equinox, not the solstices. But anyway, there are 2 other or 3 other structures. So this is like the main vantage point. And then there's, I think, another building that aligns with the equinox, and then 2 other buildings that align with each solstice. So there's Washaktun, the 8 of Pentacles. And then we had Timbuktu. So this was an interesting one for the 9 of Pentacles. Most of the documentaries are about libraries and the preservation that has gone on in terms of preserving manuscripts at Timbuktu, and how they're coming more to light because people are trusting that they won't be destroyed. But what I found in one of the documentaries is that Timbuktu was essentially founded by a woman. A woman who kind of tended a watering hole, and created, turned it into a place where people could stop and refresh themselves and connect with other people after a long journey. A market supposedly grew up around this watering hole, and and thus Timbuktu. So that, I don't know if the M is part of it or if it's just the Buktu that is the woman's name. So I don't know if her name was Mbuktu or Buktu, and so her name is preserved in the current name of the city, Timbuktu. And then I think the first mosque or large religious structure built there was funded by a rich woman. So those things kind of cemented the idea of Timbuktu as a 9 of Pentacles. However, in this card, you don't see any women, and it just shows its various wares. It was a place, a major trading post, so it was rich in its day. But more than that, it was a center actually of knowledge. It became a great kind of crossroads of knowledge, and was known for its scholars. So to me, that makes it less Pentacles. I know that there's some people who associate Pentacles with scholarly study. I generally don't, but for those of you who do, that Nine of Pentacles will make even more sense. So 10, here we enter the land of myth again. So maybe there's only two. There's this one, the 10 of Pentacles, which is the city of Cebola. And then we had the Labyrinth. Okay. So there's just two, I think. So this is a mythical city that the Spaniards chased after. And even people before them, I think they even said that this fantasy was pre-Spanish. That I don't know if they said the Greeks also had this kind of fantasy of a city of gold. Where did it come from? Or maybe it was a church thing, that there were these 7 monks that had departed and had established these cities of gold, and they were lost, and this gave them hopes that in the quote-unquote new worlds they would find these 7 cities of gold, which laid their mind open for people filling in that gap, that space. And so there's stories of people saying, oh yes, there's very wealthy cities up here and over there. And they would find these cities that were like wealthy in terms of, a good harvest, being well fed, and that sort of thing. And that, of course, was never satisfying to them. And so they kept looking until they were convinced, until a lot of people died, and they were convinced that such a thing really didn't exist. So one of the ways they feel like there was cross communication in terms of these incredible cities of gold and the idea of the 7 missionaries or priests or whomever who had established these and were lost. They said that part of the misunderstanding and why there were these goose chases is because the Mayan people that they initially had contact with, and maybe some of the Native American nations in the Southwest, have origination stories that involve 7 caves from which the 7 peoples emerged. And so they may have just been sending them to what they perceived as being one of the 7 peoples or something like that, and that were wealthy in terms of, again, good harvest, being able to care for themselves, basic stuff like that. So one of the things I got out of this was the idea of confusing material wealth with cultural wealth. And really I think in a traditional Rider-Waite-Smith 10 of Pentacles, you have both of those things. So you have the material wealth as a protective influence for generations. You know, that you're able to provide shelter for the next generation, and that generation has enough money to take care of its elders. So it's that kind of familial wealth and preservation going on there. And not wealth for its own sake, but for the preservation of the family. So this is more like the preservation of the culture. And the Spaniards, of course, were just looking for material wealth at that point. All right. So next is Ayers Rock, or Uluru, I believe it's called. I wasn't sure why this, certainly this should be in the deck somewhere. I wasn't sure why it was the page. At one point I thought it might have been the page because I think it was a relatively young explorer that first laid eyes on it. But yeah, I wasn't sure. So this is one where I never quite hit on why this was the page of Pentacles, as opposed to the Knight, because you have to travel a long distance to get to it. But I understand why this is the Knight in one respect. So to me, this just ends up being, the only other thing I could think is maybe because it's such an old formation, so just sort of the earliness of it, so like a first, the page being the first of the court cards. But yeah, it was never quite clear to me why this was the page. I mean, even though it's a big rock, it's really associated with the dream time, so I could almost see this being more a swords location. Then we have Canyon de Shea. And this was kind of, I won't say a last stand, because I think they managed to maintain their stand here. But of the Navajo, I believe it was the Navajo, not the Hopi, but I think it was the Navajo. When they were trying, the U.S. government was trying to eradicate them. And they had, I don't think it's this particular, I believe it was up higher, where they created a fortress that was essentially unreachable. And the cavalry, the U.S. forces, were down in the canyon where the water was, and they tried to wait them out. In other words, they had no water up at their fort, and so they were trying to, capture them when they would inevitably have to come down for water. And they didn't. It was said in one of the videos that they one evening made a human chain down the cliff to the water while the U.S. forces were sleeping, and gathered the water that they needed and went back up. It was also said somewhere that, again, I think it's the Navajo, were known as the Stone People. So I can see the aspect of endurance here, and the refusal to move, which is often considered a negative aspect of the Knight of Pentacles. That stubbornness. So, Westminster Abbey as the Queen. So, The Queen of Pentacles, you know. I don't know why this was chosen. Both this and the king, which is Mount Athos, have an association with the dead, because one of major aspect of Westminster Abbey is all of the people who are buried within it. So it's like a big cathedral cemetery. It's really what it is. There was one documentary that had this an older documentary that had this British fellow making all kinds of humorous remarks about the people who were buried there and the way they're congregated together and set beside one another and everything. So the only way I could really see that this was particularly queenish in terms of pentacles, I mean, it is sitting there and it's not going anywhere. So there's that pentacly aspect, but the queen aspect was that it does actually house the choir boys. There's a school there specifically for the choir boys. So there is, even though the women don't necessarily have anything to do with them, from what I saw, it was all, you know, men who were nurturing them. You know, there are children there at any rate. The other is that it's very ornate. So if we bring in the notion of the Queen of Pentacles as having Taurus energy, then I can see this as representing the Queen of Pentacles because of, you know, it's a very ornate, beautiful edifice. So yeah, there is that aspect. But it's otherwise a very male, it's a very male institution. Excuse me. One of those annoying situations where you get an unexpected tickle in the voice that completely changes my voice. Okay. This is Mount Athos in Greece, which is on a peninsula. And I don't know if it's completely disconnected from the mainland or not. Maybe it depends on the tide. At any rate, there is an Orthodox Christian set of monasteries, actually. There's several monasteries in this area. This area is actually owned by the monks, not collectively, but by the order, I suppose you would have to say. They are provided for by rich, I don't know if you'd call them, pilgrims is not the right word. Whoever gives to religious, anyway, benefactors. There are rich benefactors that provide for them. So they don't have to, they do cultivate some of their food and stuff, but they don't have to generate money in order to buy things. Both of these do take alms. Both of these institutions do take alms. Also, this is, like I said, a very ornate cemetery. this place has an ossuary. So if you become a devotee, you can, and it can't be women, it's all men, and you have like a 3-year trial period, and if you go beyond that, you can leave if you want to, but you can also stay to the end of your life, and if you die there, you are, I think they said that they do bury them, but then after a period when, that it is decayed down to their bones, they take, what I saw was the skulls in this video. There's a place where there's just a pile of skulls. So they have an ossuary. They keep them. So there you go. So to me, again, that's the head as a stone. So maybe that goes back to the scholarly aspect, one's head as a stone. So this has the masculine aspect. The material riches, like, here the one thing that we had was with the 10 was the cities of gold, and this deck is essentially said within the suit of Pentacles that it's not about gold, that the gold is a myth, and it's really back to ancestor worship, which is a lot of what was going on in the major arcana, was ancestor worship. This religion on Mount Athos, as it's practiced, has not changed since Byzantine times. They keep a Byzantine clock. That clock is how they run their day. And that's part of their pride, is that things have not changed there in eons. And this is ancestor worship in the sense of all of these famous people, the poets, the queens, the kings, other important people that are buried and collected here. So it's similar to the Pantheon also, but a more secular, in some ways, Pantheon. The tomb of the unknown soldier, all of those things. So that's an interesting perspective on, here we have both the mount aspect that we started with the worship of mountains, and we also return to the idea of worshiping the dead. That is elsewhere in this deck, not specifically in this suit, but in this deck. All right, so, oh my goodness, I rambled on. I didn't think it would take nearly that long. There's the Suit of Pentacles in the Sacred Sites Tarot. And I know some people, well, many people will, because it's a deck that is no longer in print, would not be listening to this. But part of the reason that I do these is because I will probably go back and listen to them again and take notes. This is like within a couple of days of having listened to all of these sources, and then just wanting to review them out loud. Excuse me. So that I don't completely forget them, and I have some little jotted notes that will be incomprehensible in the future. And so I wanted to speak them in here, and then I will listen to them again. This is actually my November or December deck for deck of the month. And so it might be during that time that I will actually listen back to these and try to cement some of the associations with the cards in the deck. All right, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.